A big welcome to all of you to this Teach with GIS webinar. Our session today is an introduction to our new website, which is packed full of resources for teachers looking to bring GIS into their classroom. Whether you've never touched GIS before, or if you're something of an expert already, there should be lots of material here for you on the new site. It's also an introduction to Teach with GIS as pedagogy. So what we mean when we talk about teaching with GIS versus teaching about GIS, what are concepts like GIS as the geography visualizer, and what aims and values underpin our work as a schools team. But before we get into all of that, I actually want to introduce you to the people that you have here on the call today. So first of all, you have Katie, that's me, and there's also David and Ali who are joining us. And I'm going to pass over to Dave and Ali for them to tell you a little bit about themselves. So Dave, would you like to go first and tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Hello, right, hi there folks. So I'm Dave. Confession time, I've not always been a geographer, so I didn't take geography at GCSE, but when I went to university I studied outdoor and environmental education. So essentially that was 50% playing outside and 50% studying the physical geography of the landscapes that we were playing in. So after university I went into a career pretty much in playing outside, in that I went to work in field centres. Initially I worked on the Norfolk coast, and then I moved to Shropshire, and in total I probably spent about 17 years teaching geography and biology fieldwork to anything from sort of primary age pupils all the way up to retired people who were doing degrees with the Open University. So kind of the full range of age. And through that I got really interested in the role that technology was playing in the work that we were doing with young people, in the teaching that we were doing. And that was where I discovered GIS. And gradually over time, I became the lead at FSC for education technology. And that involved working really, really closely with the education team here at Esri. And so when an opportunity came up a couple of years ago to join the team over here, I jumped at it. So now my work involves working with teachers and trainee teachers and building resources like a lot of those that we're going to look at through the webinar today.
Oh, I'm very glad that you came to join us, Dave. Thank you. Ali, would you like to say a few words about who you are and what your role is here at Esri UK? Yeah, Dave.
How's that better? I think putting my mic on might have helped. Great, welcome all. So I am fairly new to the world of GIS. I joined Esri and the world of GIS about 5 years ago. Most of my background is telecoms, in the telecoms industry. I work within the marketing department here at Esri UK, and I support the education team, so both the schools team that we've got with us here today and the higher education team, with marketing campaigns and support. So I'm here in my capacity to help run the webinar. I'll also be popping up towards the end. We've got a Q&A session, so depending on how much time we've got left, we will get through as many questions as we can at the end. So please do pop your questions into the chat box as we're going through. Anything that occurs to you, please just put it in there and we will cover off as much as we can at the end.
Thank you, Ali. To round us out then, I should do my introduction. So as I said, I'm Katie and I'm the schools manager. So my first real experience with GIS was at university, where I used it in research, first of all about use of space in Viking Age houses, and then later on looking at the way that prehistoric landscapes were used. So like Dave, I actually started out in a different field than pure geography. Originally, I was a geoarchaeologist. But after I finished my PhD, I moved into teaching and I started work as a geography teacher. And that's where I became interested in how GIS can be used to effectively enhance teaching and learning in the geography classroom. And that's ultimately what then led me to take up a role in the education team here at Esri UK into, I think it was 2017. So now that you know a little bit about us, I'd like to start with a little bit more detail on that effective use of GIS in the geography classroom before we then have a look at our new resources. So I'm hoping, there we go. The first question that I think any of us as educators should ask before we bring something new into our teaching is why? why do I want to adopt this approach, or why do I want to use this particular piece of technology? And too often, I think in teaching, the answer can be, why am I doing this? Because somebody told me that I have to. And we all know how that tends to go. So I wanted to talk a bit about why I started using GIS and why I'm so passionate about giving all the teachers out there the skills to use it successfully. And the reason for that really is that I want to empower my students to be able to make compassionate, evidence-informed decisions about the sustainable development of our world. As my fellow citizens, when they leave the classroom and take their place in that wider world, I want them to understand why it currently operates the way that it does and what impact their actions might have to change it in the future. And I think GIS helps with this as part of the wider toolbox of geography in a number of different ways. And I think in other webinars in our series that we'll introduce later on, we'll get into this in more detail. But what I want to introduce here is that we think there's a pathway, a gentle on-ramp to follow when you start using GIS that will make it relevant and interesting and rewarding for both teachers and students. So that looks a little something like this. And if you've attended any of my other talks at various conferences and some of these other webinars previously, you have probably seen a version of this slide already, but I do think it's something that's really important to kind of outline. And so that's why we're starting with it today. So in first encounters with GIS, we suggest that we use GIS as a geography visualizer, as a way of exploring places and also exploring a student's knowledge and understanding of those places, mostly doing that as a front of class tool to start with. So rather than dropping students in at the deep end with data collection and analysis, which has traditionally been the case for a lot of us that encounter GIS in higher education, our students should first see it used as an intuitive tool for exploring and questioning. And after they've seen us model that, they can move on to starting to use it independently for exploration and self-reflection. So our next webinar is actually going to be unpacking this visualizer concept in much more detail. So I'm not going to dwell too long on that concept today, but this is the gentle on-ramp for GIS. And this is what structures our new site and the types of resources that you will encounter in different sections on that site. So I wanted you to sort of see the underlying structure, see where the planning sort of came from before we jump into that site itself and start looking at what's available. So you can still all see on the screen there the site itself in its bright orange glory. So this color change is actually kind of important to help you know that you're in the right place. So there's actually a number of other Teach with GIS sites that are in operation there in different countries, all based on our original Teach with GIS website. And obviously those different countries want to provide materials for different national curriculums and different exam boards. So we wanted a clear signal that you're on the UK site. Hence, we're now orange. If it isn't orange, you're on another country's Teach with GIS. I'm actually going to take a little break from speaking now, and I'm going to let you guys see the video that's at the top of the website here, where teachers and students who are already using GIS in their classroom talk about their experiences. Our goal with ArcGIS Online is that it makes the lives of teachers easier, that it's going to be that route into real depth and breadth in their teaching. There's over 3,500 schools that are using it in the UK at the moment, and we also provide it to colleges and universities as well.
I really love using ArcGIS software in class because I think it really helps students to really ask questions about places. It helps them to take ownership of their learning and to really find out about lots of detailed information. So it goes from being somewhere that they look at maybe a few photos of, read a bit of text, to actually, it's second best to actually visiting the place.
GIS is the most unbelievably powerful tool to teach geography. It's one of those things where you can really see the light bulb moment happening in a lesson.
When they're using ArcGIS software, students can really process lots of complex information really quickly. It's really enjoyable for me when students ask lots of questions and they really engage with a place, and it really makes teaching a subject much easier because you have the buy-in from the students.
I think ArcGIS is a brilliant platform. It's so versatile and it allows for such creativity, but still representing data in a really clear, understandable way.
It is very easy to use. It's a really great way to present your data, and you can present many different types of data, not just one specific thing.
It's complex, but at the same time it displays data in a nice, simple way that's readable and understandable.
I think sometimes the biggest barrier to using GIS is thinking that it's a big, complicated system, but actually just doing a little bit at a time and starting quite small and just building it into one lesson at a time. GIS is actually incredibly accessible.
It's a cloud-based software, so that means there's no logins. You don't have to kind of install things to immediately get going with it. You can just pop onto a computer. As long as you've got an internet connection, you can start doing some teaching with GIS.
I can give a link to students and they can use this for homework, to explore a place, to research somewhere. Students can save their work, they can collect data and then upload that data, and they can go back to it later on. There are thousands of different story maps that help students really understand lots of different aspects of geography.
It's a completely free software to all schools, so all schools can get accounts to it, and actually to start using it in the first instance, you don't even need a login.
95% of geography graduates are in full-time employment or further training within 6 months of completing their course, and GIS is part of the leading edge of that employability. So if you want to fight climate change, then it's a skill that's going to be useful. It's there sort of helping to resettle refugees, it's helping to address social inequality, it's looking at health inequality and improving health outcomes around the world.
I think my first piece of advice would be to get in touch with Esri UK. They're absolutely fantastic. They're so helpful, and they can kind of deliver training. The materials that they've got to support teachers with planning lessons are really excellent. That are available on their website.
I think using ArcGIS really helps me to teach and to infuse the students. It gives so much information, and I think that ArcGIS really helps to bring geography alive.
So, welcome back. I just want to quickly say thank you in particular to Susie and to Lizzie and to the fantastic students there at Harris City Academy, Crystal Palace, for their help in making that video. What I'm going to do now then, now that we've sort of had a little look at their introduction there, I'm just going to scroll down from that explainer video and just show you these main navigation options. So we hope that they're fairly self-explanatory, but I do want to draw your attention to the teach and the learn buttons. So this is what I was referring to about that sequenced pathway that led us to structure the site in a particular way. So most of the resources that are here in the teach section are aimed at that initial part of the gentle on-ramp. So they are predominantly tools for looking at the world or for exploring data about the world to help you teach different topics across your curriculum. Fundamentally, we see you are the expert when it comes to your schools, when it comes to your geography curriculum, and when it comes to your students. There's no one-size-fits-all lesson on, let's say, water and GIS that we could build that is going to work for everyone. We know that you're going to need to adapt and tailor anything that we provide to actually make it work in your context. So think of Teach as some really simple GIS building blocks. They're tools for exploring geography concepts and case studies, which you can then use to develop and enhance your existing lessons. In contrast, Learn is where you will find more step-by-step guided tutorials, as the resources in Learn are about using the GIS itself. And in this instance, we do feel that we're the experts and we want to make it super easy for you and your students to start to move along that gentle on-ramp, to be able to move on from things that we've built for you to resources that you're able to make for yourself, and to start using some of the more sophisticated tools that are part of ArcGIS Online itself and that kind of GIS experience. Okay, I think that is enough explanation from me to be going on with. So I'm going to hand over to the estimable Mr. Morgan now, who is actually going to start our tour of the resources inside Teach.
Thank you very much. So, yep, I'm going to make my way into Teach. I'm going to click on that little orange Teach button, and then we get something that looks kind of similar again. So I've got another set of doorways that I can head through, and those doorways are kind of topic based. At the moment, a lot of those, well, at the moment we've got 6, and we kind of plan to grow them. So there will be more of these topics kind of coming in due course. But I'm just going to dip into this first one, the first step on that that gentle on ramp. This idea of the geography visualizer. As Katie said earlier, the geography visualizer concept is a topic of our first webinar, and we'll sort of mention more about how you can join that webinar later on. But for the time being, I'm going to hop into this top item. There we go. Yes, I am. So I'm going to take a little look at this digital world atlas. So we built this digital atlas. Right, there we go. Thank you, Katie, if you're helping me behind the scenes there. So we built the Digital World Atlas to be your first step into GIS, really. And I genuinely think that there's a place for this in every single lesson that you teach. So if I, or maybe Katie's going to help me. Oh no, I've got control, it's okay. I'm just going to pop that out of this story map so we can see this a little bit bigger, a full screen. So here it is. There's no login. I've not had to sign in with a username or a password or anything to get to here. And I've got the whole world. I can go and visit anywhere that I like, either on this 3D globe, or if I want to take that 3D view into a 2D map, I can switch across to that 2D map instantly, and it should find, it knows where I was, it'll jump across there. It's taking a little bit of time in this demo to do it live, but it should all find where we were and jump us back across to the Alps in a moment. It's because I'm trying to do this across the internet onto Katie's computer and beam it all to you at the same time. So it's not being quite as speedy.
This is just my internet connection struggling ever so slightly there as it tries to run Teams, and there we go.
There we go. So if we've hopped back to 3D, but as I'm in a 3D map, I can start to explore that landscape in 3D as well. And I've got a whole selection of tools that I can use across that landscape. So I've got access to these measuring tools where I can look at measuring straight line distances, measuring areas on whichever of the maps that I might be on. So whether I'm on a 2D map or a 3D map, I've got access to those little measuring toolboxes. I can also dig into a variety of base maps. So I really like to use aerial imagery with students because I think it's really easy for them to interpret. It's really easy to get your head around, well, what does this mean? Because it looks just like your eyes see the world. There's no symbology to get your head around or anything like that. But if I was teaching a lesson on tectonics, I might want to flip that to something like the oceans base map, which takes a lot of the focus away from the land and throws it into the sea. And as I start to zoom out to a more global scale and to a little section of ocean, we can see that some of those underwater structures that make up the plate margins of our tectonic boundaries start to appear and start to show up on my map there. There's also on the left-hand side here a little collection of frequently used layers. So these are layers that we know that that are quite commonly used in teaching. So you've got kind of earthquakes, volcanoes, tectonic plate boundaries, some climate layers in terms of sort of projections and observations. We've got kind of lines of latitude and longitude, prime meridians, things like that, and a whole load of other bits and pieces to get stuck into. And if I don't want those in the way, I can move to a full screen mode to see what I've make the map the real focus. So if I've got this on my whiteboard, I don't have to have all of that stuff on the left hand side in the way. I can clear that out and make the map the real focus of my work. The final thing that I can do if I want to make this map my own, there's a little set of drawing tools in there as well. So I can start to annotate up my maps that I'm going to be using in my teaching as well. So hopefully that's a tool that you can kind of start to see some potential for, some places that you might be able to slot that straight into your lessons, maybe even tomorrow morning.
Yeah. I am, if it's going to let me have access to the mouse, which I think it has just done, I'm gonna move to a slightly different curriculum area now. So I'm going to come back to the Teach With site itself. And I am going to go to an area that I particularly enjoy with my background in archaeology, which is time. So these resources in the time section here, they're aimed at both the geography classroom, and we hope they'll also have some broader currency in the humanities with your history colleagues as well. So today I'm going to scroll down. We've got some lovely historic maps that we can look at, but I'm actually going to have a look in the first instance at the Wayback app, which is our route to comparing and contrasting satellite imagery from the past and present. So if I click to launch that, so if you need a reminder of what I'm going to show you now, it's here in this story map all about the Wayback app. But for now, I'm actually going to pop it out into its own tab so that we can see it all on screen. So this is the Wayback app, and on the right-hand side here, we've got a satellite image of, it's actually Las Vegas. And me and Dave were delivering a CPD session yesterday for some PGCE students, and we were wondering why it's Las Vegas that the app defaults to. And I think it's actually because, you may already know, Las Vegas is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. So this is a really cool place to go and see rapid kind of urban development, and it contrasts really nicely with that desert landscape where you've got the development of the city. But we can go anywhere in the world to use this app. So I'm going to go to one of my favourite places on earth, which is Birmingham. So here is Birmingham, and I'm going to zoom into the city centre a little bit. There is the Grand Central Station development, and we can see all of the HS2 kind of works that are occurring around Curzon Street to prepare for that development that's taking place there. So that's what we've got here on the satellite image, and the little search bar is letting us go and find, anywhere we want to go and see in the world. And on this left-hand side of the screen here, these are all of the different satellite images that are available moving back in time for this particular area. So at the moment, I can see loads and loads of different images, but some of them you can see are highlighted here. And these ones that are highlighted are versions of the satellite image where there are obvious local changes. And if I tick this button here, it will just collapse that menu down so that I've only really got the images where there's a significant change on that screen. And you can see as I'm just moving my mouse over these, it offers you a little preview so you can see what that change of image might be. And if I click on one of these, it will change the satellite image. So now I am looking at that historic satellite imagery essentially from 2014. And it's kind of astonishing to me how in such a relatively short space of time, that central Birmingham area has developed. All of that new sort of Grand Central architecture wasn't built yet. None of that work had been completed. All of the sort of work for HS2 hadn't started yet. So this is sort of your way of exploring sort of changes in the local geography over the last kind of decade or so. And what would be really useful is that rather than having to flip back and forth between modern and historic imagery, if I could see them side by side and do a bit of a comparison. And one of the things I love about this app is that we can do that really easily. So if I click on that little sort of toggle button there, at the moment, it's kind of boring because I've got the same layer on both sides. But if I click up here, I've now got the most recent imagery here on the right. I've got the historic imagery here on the left, and I can just move that slider backwards and forwards for me to have a look and see, what changes are available to observe in that particular area. So obviously I've picked Central Birmingham because I know it well, and I know there's been this massive amount of development work there. But as I said earlier, you can go absolutely anywhere in the world. So if you want to look at other massive infrastructure projects, if you want to look at things like deforestation in the Amazon, you could look even at sort of your local sort of scale of change. So if there's been kind of development just down the road from your school, you should be able to spot that and pick it up in the satellite images. So that there is the Wayback app and kind of all of the different places that you can go and see and do that comparison of imagery on. So I'm going to hand back over to you, Dave.
Fantastic. So if Katie, I'm going to let you drive and hope that that works a little bit better. So I'm going to try and talk, and Katie's going to hopefully drive us around. So if we make our way back to the Teach site and back through that Teach door, we're going to take a last little look in the climate crisis doorway. So here we've got data sets and tools around sort of weather and climate change. So this is where you can start to explore all of those sort of really current issues, as well as some of those more kind of traditional parts of our curriculum of sort of what's the difference between weather and climate and all of those aspects. So we're going to dig into this top tool, this 50 years of UK weather data. And a little bit like the Wayback app, this is all wrapped up inside a little story map. So there's a guide there to kind of help you find your way back through those resources and sort of prompt some thinking for your students. But we're going to take a look straight into this rainfall dashboard for the time being. So here we get into some tools that are a little bit more data focused than perhaps some of the ones that we've looked at so far. So this set of tools pulls together 50 years of weather data from the Met Office dating back to the 1970s, and it's going to let us explore things like temperature, precipitation, and also snowfall for those kind of interesting, exciting days that we get a little bit of snow disrupting our school day. So I can explore patterns of precipitation on a national level. I can zoom into a region that I might be interested in, or even I can get right into the grid square that my particular school or home is in. So I can get really far down to lots of detail. If I'm interested in seasonal variations in climate, I can look at that graph of mean monthly rainfall and start to pick up patterns there. And in the top right hand corner, I can change the month that's being displayed on the map. So I don't have to have an annual average, but I can have any month of my choosing displayed on the map there. With this big long-term graph down at the bottom, I can also start to explore patterns of rainfall over a much longer period of time. So rather than using those Met Office 30-year averaging time periods, I can look over a 50-year time period and look at monthly values of rainfall or temperature over that 50-year period. Because of this, I can use this to start to identify maybe extreme events. So where are those occasions of extreme rainfall or extreme dry, extreme hot or extreme cold? And maybe start to understand the conditions that have led to the case studies that I might be teaching about. So where I am in Shropshire, back in February 2020, we had some of the biggest floods for 20 years. So I can start to use this map and these data sets to understand why. So rather than zooming into Shropshire, I'm going to zoom in, or I'm going to ask Katie to zoom into the catchment of the River Severn, so around mid Wales, so somewhere between Aberystwyth and the Welsh border. And we're going to filter down that big graph at the bottom, the big 50-year graph. So rather than looking at 50 years, we're going to focus more on sort of 2019 to 2020. So we're going to just look at a couple of years just to give us something that's a bit less busy. And now February 2020 starts to appear a little bit more obviously on my graph as being a year that is, or a month that is pretty wet. And I can compare that February 2020 value of rainfall with the February mean monthly rainfall in the graph above, and with previous Februaries. So compared with 2019, really wet, compared with the average February over that 30-year recent period, more than twice as wet. So getting on for kind of 3 times as much rainfall in that part of the catchment over that particular month. So we can start to see maybe why that flood event perhaps occurred, and we can pull out some numbers that we can use in our case studies as facts and figures. Finally, if I wanted to pull some of this data out, maybe I want my students to practice drawing climate graphs for themselves. I can go to the little download buttons on those climate graphs. So the mean monthly rainfall one at the top, and I can download the data that makes up that graph. So I can do that for any area that I'm interested in, whatever I've zoomed to on my map. That's going to come down as a little spreadsheet, and I can use that data to give to my students and to start to get them perhaps hand drawing those climate graphs for themselves.
Amazing, thank you. I tried my best to drive as competently as possible. So there are lots and lots of other curriculum areas for you to explore in this Teach With section, and we are going to be adding to these as we find and produce new tools that we think will be useful for you. If you follow us on social media, we'll let you know as soon as these new topic areas come online. But I do want to give kind of a sneak peek. A section that we're hoping to launch very soon is going to be a dedicated primary area. So that's going to have resources tailored specifically for that context and guidance for staff who are working in primary who are not necessarily a geography specialist by training and may have never come across GIS really in any context before. Hopefully that's useful for any primary teachers that we've got here today on the call, but also in terms of your relationships that you might have in the secondary sector with your feeder primary schools. You can always point them to the same sort of place where you're getting your resources from for that connectivity through. Outside of Teach, as I've mentioned, we have Learn. And Learn is the place where you can make your next steps when you're ready to move on from the tools that we make to your own creation. So this is where you can find the direct guidance as to how to make a map, how to make a 3D map, all the way up to starting to make apps like the ones that we've been looking at in today's session. And this is also where you can direct students who you want to learn to drive ArcGIS. So if they're going to be using GIS for their NEA fieldwork, for example, this is a good place to send them to get them started in terms of preparing themselves for that. There's just a couple of other areas that I want to highlight as well. So if I come back to the main page, I think the first of these is this training page, where you will find a calendar of all of our upcoming webinars, all of our face-to-face CPD opportunities, as well as, if I scroll down, a catalogue of previously recorded events, just like this one will go in to be. I just want to draw your attention to this calendar here because your eyes do not deceive you. We really do have a 15-minute webinar planned for 7:45 in the morning. So that is going to be a live stream that goes out on YouTube. And I just wanted to explain sort of the reason behind that because it does seem a little odd. But this actually is something that I really valued in my teaching career. My school ran 15-minute sessions once a week early in the morning where staff would share things that they were finding helpful in their own teaching. So it could be like a new classroom tool, it could be a micro presentation on a particular sort of way of thinking about a problem, anything at all that was kind of helpful in your teaching. And the idea was that you could then give it a go with your own classes that day to try it out. And if it worked, brilliant, you've now got something that you can permanently add into your teacher toolkit. And if it didn't work so well, Well, it was only a minute or two of the lesson that was taken up by something so short and simple, so there was no harm done. And we really want to do the same here. We want to show you something very simple in ArcGIS that you can implement with your classes that day or very soon after, and to see how they work for you. I will say, don't worry though, if that time isn't going to work for you, if that is too early, or if you've got other sort of sessions that you're running at that time scale in the morning with your students, we will be recording these micro webinars as usual, so you can always catch up on them later on as well, and they will drop into this section here with our other recorded events. The other button that I did want to mention is this careers button. We're really keen that teachers are able to connect what we teach about geography to what real professional geographers do out in the world. There are so many exciting and rewarding careers out there for people with geography qualifications, but they can be hard to see sometimes from our classrooms. So the careers button will actually take you straight through to our Careers with GIS site, where you can find some interesting life stories of real professional geographers that talk through their journey from classroom to career. So the idea is that they're kind of very much the steps that students can take for themselves to find their place in that career as well. We tend to focus very much on early career professionals, so there isn't a great amount of distance between classroom and career, and so that they're genuinely kind of able to act as role models. But alongside this, as well as the the Careers with GIS site itself, as we collect stories that relate to particular curriculum areas, we're also starting to feature them inside Teach with GIS as well. So this example here is in the hazard section because of we have somebody that uses GIS to kind of deal with natural hazards and disasters as part of their day job. So our hope with this is that you can show students how the lessons that they're learning in your classrooms are applied and used for real outside of school, and encourage them to consider a career in geography for themselves as well. Now, that is pretty much everything that we wanted to show you inside of Teach with GIS today. There's still lots of other areas for you to go kind of and explore for yourselves. We didn't want to spoil all of it. We just wanted to give a preview of a few kind of key parts. So we're going to hand over to you now. And if you have any questions, we're going to use our remaining time today really to answer those. So any questions that you've got, if you want to drop them in the chat box, and we will do our very best to answer them. So thank you very much for listening to us. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, we'll hand over to you and your questions.
Thanks, Katie. It's Ali here. So we've got a few questions that came in advance. We had some people that couldn't join, so perhaps I could start with those. So the first question is around training. So can I get training directly from your team for our department?
Yeah, so absolutely you can. There's kind of a number of different ways that you can go about this. The first thing to do would be to check on that training page, I would say, and see if there's any upcoming events that we're running that are local to you, where you can go and access face-to-face training already. If there aren't any, or if there's none that kind of work time-wise or location-wise, you can always get in touch with the team. We're happy to run face-to-face training sessions for large enough groups. So if you can get kind of a number of departments together across a trust, or if you work in sort of a network of schools and you can bring some teachers together to run a face-to-face session, we can do that. And these days as well, we're also more than happy to offer online training. So that can often be a good solution if you're a smaller number of sort of teachers that want to get together to do some of that training. But yeah, basically have a look at that training page, and if there's nothing on there that quite works, use the get in touch with us button and just get in contact.
That's great. Thanks, Katie. We've also got a question in around somebody that's built their own tools and lessons. Are they able to submit those in to the team to include on the site?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're more than happy, and we'd very much like to be able to platform tools that teachers have built for themselves. So I think, again, if you get in touch, if you've got something in particular that you want to submit, we will be kind of putting a form onto the Teach with GIS site itself to enable you to kind of do that. And then we'll be able to assess what that tool is, figure out exactly where it's going to fit in those different curriculum areas, and put it up there as well.
That's great. It would be really good to share for our teachers to share some of the work that they've been doing with others, and if we can use that, if we can facilitate that, that's fantastic. I've got another one here, which is all about the Wayback app that you showed. So
yeah, and
how do I go back?
We've got some in the chat window as well that was about the Wayback one. So what did I click on to get to the maps which show changes over time? So if I just if I quickly go back, I can answer both those questions, I think. So just let me try and bring back Teach with GIS. So the Wayback app is in the time curriculum area because it deals with changes over time. And if I reopen it back up and just launch it into its own little window there. So the question in the chat window is, click on to get the maps which show changes over time. So it's all just inside this app. So you go to the area that you're interested in. I find it's kind of easiest to tick that box so that you only see versions of the satellite imagery where there's changes. And then if I want to build that swipe app so that I can swipe back and forth between the two, that is where I do it on screen, that little icon with the arrows. And I can just pick, here's my most recent imagery on the left, and here's the oldest imagery on the right. So there we go. That's sort of that development I was talking about on the outskirts of Las Vegas that we can see really clearly. And as I kind of mentioned as we were going through that, it's actually that Wayback app is wrapped in a story map that gives you some instructions. So you don't have to kind of come back and watch this webinar. It will be there for you on that page with a reminder of how you use it. And then the question, sort of, Ali, that I've seen that had come in sort of previously, what do I do if I want sort of satellite imagery that's older than the last decade? So actually, if we scroll down to the bottom of this story map about the Wayback app, if you want to go back further, we'd recommend that you use the Landsat Explorer app. Landsat satellites have been in orbit since the 70s, so we've got 40 plus kind of years of images now. They really are becoming a kind of historic resource, but there's just a couple of caveats with Landsat. It's a slightly more complicated tool to use than Wayback because of there's a lot more information that's come from the Landsat imagery, and also just to be aware that obviously satellite imagery from 40 years ago is not necessarily quite as crisp and clear as what we're able to achieve with modern cameras, and there wasn't the same global coverage as there is now. Obviously, sort of in the 70s, there were certain areas of the planet that were more of interest to folks that were capable of putting satellites up in space that could take photos. So it's just, it requires a little bit more searching to find exactly the data that you're interested in if you're going to go back that far.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Katie. I can't see any more questions. If anybody has got anything, just drop it into the chat box the next minute or two. Can you see?
Yeah, I can see a few more.
I think I've got an issue on my app at the moment, so apologies.
So, no, it's fine. Dave, if I jump us back to, we've got a question about the visualizer.
The one about the switching from 2D to 3D.
Indeed.
Yes. So the way to do it, and hopefully now Katie has got control, it will work better than when I was trying to demonstrate it. It's just that big orange button on the left hand side. So in the bottom left corner, that's your switch from 2D to 3D, and it should, as it didn't when I tried to show it should preserve where you are in the world. So if I've zoomed into a little spot in the Lake District on my 3D map or my 2D map, when I jump into 3D, it will kind of drag me over to that same place.
Absolutely. Now that I'm driving it, it absolutely is doing that properly.
Doing that absolutely perfectly. I think there's another question, Katie, that kind of links to the atlas, isn't there? So the one about perhaps just turning on and off some of those layers that I didn't have the mouse dexterity to be able to do earlier. So if we head out to a global view, because some of those aren't that exciting if you look at them just in the UK. So some of them are kind of clustered in groups. So where there's a little triangle next to the name, that's because there's a little cluster of cluster of layers that kind of fit within that group. Where there's just an eye, that's because we're just looking at a single layer there. But I could start to layer up maybe, as Kate is doing, volcanic eruptions with population density, and start to identify maybe areas that are perhaps more or less at risk of the impacts of those volcanic eruptions. Again, because we're trying to do it over the internet and show you the thing that's coming from the internet over the internet, it's being a little bit slow to load that. And obviously, because population density is everywhere in the world, that's quite a big layer for us to try and do that with. So we're really stretching the limits of our internet connection today. There we go.
So that, I really like that example, where exactly you can see that significant volcanic eruptions, and you can go and see exactly what the population density is in that immediate area around them. And if I really wanted to, we could pop it into, oh, it's going to travel.
Gonna jump over there.
Into 3D as well, to kind of get that sense of what that landscape looks like and kind of explore, you know, are the volcanoes part of a mountain range, all of that kind of stuff as well. I think that's the two questions we've got about the visualizer there.
I think so.
A question about if there's a charge for online training. No, everything that the schools team does is completely free. There is no charge for any engagement with us, whether that's in school, online, the sessions that we run in conjunction kind of with other folks. Occasionally, things like sessions at the RGS, there's a small charge to cover things like the lunch that you'll get there and hire of rooms. But if we're on site with you or we're doing anything online, then that will be totally free. Question about the credit system. Are they automatically renewed for a school for free each year? And how many credits would you suggest allocating to students? They're not automatically renewed. You get given, I think, 20,000 when you take out your ArcGIS Online for Schools account. But there is no official limit on the number of credits that schools are allowed to use. The reason that you have such an enormous number of them as a school is because we have to put a number in that box. And so we tried to pick one that's big enough that no school could ever possibly use all of those credits. If you do find that you're starting to eat through them and come anywhere near close to that limit, we'd really recommend that you get in touch with the team because there aren't many uses of the GIS in a school context that I can think of where you should be using that many credits. And so we'd probably want to look at what it is you're doing and see if there's a more efficient way for you to run that analysis or to store that data, because of the idea is that credits should never ever be a limit to anyone in an educational context from doing what they need to do. So yeah, we can, if we absolutely needed to, get more, but in general we think your kind of existing limit should be hopefully more than enough for any kind of activity that you're looking to do. In terms of how many credits I'd suggest allocating to students for general analysis, tools and storage, as a default, we put 250 on accounts where people are going to be using them fairly heavily. And that is just to stop really students from accidentally running analyses that are going to eat up thousands of credits. Again, it's more just a sense checker on the kind of GIS activity that they're looking to do rather than an absolute hard limit on credit. Hopefully that answers the question there.
Yeah, and I guess to jump in there as well, part of the reason that we put that limit on students isn't necessarily to stop them doing a big analysis, but it's kind of because if you accidentally do an analysis that's a bit bigger than the area that you're really interested in, it just takes ages. So it's kind of a performance thing. You might start an analysis, it spins around and it looks like it's not working, and then you come back later on and you've done something that covers the entire world when actually you wanted Shropshire or Shrewsbury or the tiny village that you're interested in. So there's kind of a performance sort of reason there as well. It just means that it stops you accidentally running a massive thing that's going to take ages and you think it's not working.
Absolutely. I'm glad we've answered that for you. Any other questions that I've missed in the chat? Can't see any additional
Anymore?
ones. If you do have any questions that kind of occur to you sort of after today's session, or yeah, if you're watching this kind of on the recording and you want to get in touch with us later, that's absolutely fine. Just get in contact with that school's team via our school's email. Oh, when are we launching the primary aspect? I don't have an absolute date on that because it does depend a little bit on some of the other work that me and Dave have to run over the next part of the year, because this is our kind of busy period with doing a lot of PGCE training sessions. But we're hopeful that it will be before Christmas, this side of Christmas. As I said, we'll really flag that up on our social media as soon as we're even close to kind of finishing that. There'll be lots of us being very happy about it all over our Twitter accounts, I'd imagine. Did we show an example of tropical storm tracking? We absolutely can.
We need to go into hazards for that, don't we?
We do. So probably hurricane aware is going to be the best one to use here. So this is where I've got to go and find an active storm at the moment. And I'm not sure there's any that are actually being tracked right now. Having had a really busy sort of part of the season a few weeks ago, I'm not sure if they've actually got any that are significant enough to turn up on the tracker right now. But essentially, as soon as a tropical storm or hurricane is recorded and is tracked by the weather agencies, it will appear both on the map with a little kind of cone showing its anticipated area of impact, and it will also appear in the drop-down menu here so that you can select storm or storms that you're interested in and follow their tracks. But this is because this is a live app. If there's no live data at the moment, because there's not a sort of burgeoning storm, there won't be anything to show in there.
And I guess that kind of brings us to a little bit to one of the things that we are sort of planning to do on the Teach site, and that's for it to be a very live resource. So for the moment, there are hurricanes. The week that we launched the new Orange Teach site, there was Hurricane Ian, and it was really timely and it was dead exciting. But not if you were in the path, but it was kind of handy, handy timing. If you come and look at that Hurricane Aware app in the summer, it's pretty underwhelming, kind of like it was just now. So seasonally, we're going to kind of rotate some of these resources in and out. So you might find that if you came back in the summer, the Hurricane Aware app isn't there at all, because there's not really much going on in terms of hurricane activity. So there's a little bit of seasonality to the site that you might pick up on over time. But if you do find, oh, there was something I used ages ago, and I kind of want to find my way back to it, but I can't remember where it is. If something cycled off the main page, it will probably have cycled into the archive area. So you can kind of drill back in and find things that might have moved away from being kind of promoted highly and being on that front page, and we've perhaps just tucked them away in the archive there.
Yeah, so that data for Hurricane Ian is very much available elsewhere, and that's kind of a lovely example of where you need to start to move from the kind of simple tools that we provide for you through to doing some of those lessons on how to make your own 2D map, and then being able to build that resource specifically for your students. So the data is there, and there is, I think, a current tutorial available from our American sort of distributor. So if you want to send us an email, then we can link you to that resource that tells you how to make your own map about making hurricanes. Yes. We will stay for another couple of minutes in case there's anything else that drops into that chat window. But I will just say thank you very much again for listening today and for these fantastic questions. It's a real pleasure to be able to do this and to show this resource to you.